Previously on agentpalmer.com, reading Player One by Douglas Copeland post-pandemic challenges its new normal narrative. You probably know Hipgnosis, you just don't know it, and James continues to post intriguing videos sharing his journey into the depths of nostalgia. This is the Palmer Files, episode 121 with Amber Naslund, an entrepreneur, marketer, salesperson, writer, leader, and too many more things there isn't enough time to mention. We discuss careers and trajectories, confidence and risk, fear and opportunity, setbacks and balance, and so much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show! Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 121st episode is Amber Naslund. Amber is many things. She's a mom and an equestrian, but we met on the shared field of marketing and odd career trajectories. That's where the conversation starts. But where does it lead? It leads to discussions of job searching and consulting. It continues with risk tolerance and confidence. You'll also hear us discuss that perhaps self-worth identity and professional identity and success shouldn't be confused with each other, not being able to save us from ourselves, perspective, balance, thought leadership, journaling, writing, and disconnecting with analog. All of that and a whole lot more is coming your way. But first, remember that if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterwards, you can find all related ways to contact my guest, Amber Naslund, and myself in the show notes. Don't forget you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, and of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. Amber, I know that you have done a lot of things in your career, but one of them is to help people with their own careers. And I am currently in a stagnation of careers of sorts. Like I had a professional gig for quite a while, and then it went away, and then a pandemic happened, and I've never quite recovered. And given that my field is marketing, and it's a horrible field to be in, it feels like I loved it, but it never felt safe. I feel like I just watch all of the opportunities close as I sit on the sidelines and take small consulting gigs. Not to put you too on the spot, but do you have any advice?
Do you want the small consulting gigs, or do you want back into a gig?
You know, I am a horrible salesperson of myself, so I would very much rather have the gig. I almost want to go in and punch a clock from 9 to 5. That would be fine. I don't that part never bothered me. But I'm horrible at getting new clients. The gigs I've got now, I fell into. That's the kind of consultant I am right now.
Well, and I believe it or not, I think there's a lot of people who make very good livings falling into opportunities left, right, and center. That's how
I'm not that lucky. I mean, this
Well, and I owned a business for a while, and my least favorite part about it was keeping the business afloat by constantly having to go hustle and find new business.
I still don't understand how any business works, because I've never met a business owner who's liked that part.
Yeah.
And
it's not that I didn't like it. It's that it's immensely stressful for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But it also it's very difficult to work on the business and in the business at the same time.
Yep.
So the work that I loved, which was all the client facing stuff, was hard to balance with constantly feeling like I needed to keep the pipeline full of potential new clients. And that was one of many reasons I decided that that particular flavor of entrepreneurship is not something I enjoyed a ton. But to your original question, I think, especially in the current climate for job seekers, it's the toughest market I've ever seen.
It feels like, look, and I've been saying this for a while. I'm waiting for the full AI implosion because I think it needs to fail more than it has in order for people to be like, yes, I want that human to write me that thing again. And it will. But people are like, well, are you still looking? And it's like, I am still looking. I haven't applied in a while. Because there's been nothing. Like the last time I really went out there, I had two specific examples that are pretty standard, I think. One was I'm a jack of all trades. So like they were like, well, what can you do for us? And I was like, well, what do you want me to do for you? Like I've already told you I'm willing to show up at an office. And this was after the guy in the preamble had spent 5 minutes lamenting the fact that nobody wants to come to the office. Like, I'll do that. I'm that's fine. I'm not. And then, that went nowhere. And then the other one was, I said I was a writer, and they said, well, how are you with prompts? And I said, well, you give me a prompt and I'll write about it. And they're like, no, like with artificial engines. And I'm like, not good. Not good at all. And they're like, all right, well, thanks, but no thanks. I was like, well, okay. I think I've gone as far as I can go, and I have to wait for the guy who wants somebody to come into the office to get desperate enough, and the guy who wants the technology to do it to be desperate enough. I think that's where that's where it feels like I'm at right now.
Well, the hard truth, I think, is that even if you are a jack of all trades, and there's a lot of value in being a generalist or someone who has a broad skill set, the reality of the job market right now, especially, is that people need and want specialists, and they want specificity. So they want someone who can do a specific job that solves a specific problem that they have in their business. And for example, right now, they're in the marketing world, and all of my clients, like I work in the advertising industry. So I work with marketers. I was a marketer for 20 some odd years. The reality of the marketing job market is that people need specific functional expertise. They need people who know how to create content in a number of different formats and modes. They need people who can design, architect, and run campaigns. They need people who understand analytics and can run a tech stack on analytics. So they have very specific sets of needs. And in a job market like this, when it's highly competitive, every role is very saturated with qualified candidates, you have to be able to be specific about the problem you can solve and how your expertise is relevant to the job that they have. And as much as it's nice to like keep it open-ended and be like, I can do whatever you need me to do, nobody's going to take the time to figure that out with you.
That's fine. I've always said, like, I wonder where in my, so I'm in that in between generation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 40, so I'm not quite millennial. I'm not quite Gen X. And I was sold the lie that if I got a degree, I'd get a good job. And that never really happened. And I was told that if I was well-rounded, I would be hireable, and that never really happened. And it was just one thing after another, and here I am now. Like, it's been years. I've done my 7+ years in retail, and I've done my 7+ years in professionalism, and I wouldn't trade either of them, but like, it feels like I could have ended up here without all of that.
Well, my dirty little secret that comes up in conversation once in a while is that I don't have a degree, and I am squarely Gen X. So I'll be 49 this summer, which is like insane to think about. But I too was given a lot of the you know, go to college, work hard, put your nose to the grindstone, and good things will befall you. The reality of the professional world is it's not a meritocracy.
No.
A lot of times it is who you know, what you know, good timing, a little bit of dose of luck.
A big dose of luck. Like it feels like I think a lot of people like, and granted, if you work to give yourself more opportunities, you'll have better luck. But I still think it really comes down to like, did you talk to that person on a good day? Did they even look at your email? Like,
well, and you've probably heard the adage about luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
I have heard that, but I hate that because I've prepared a lot and failed.
Yeah, and I think that the if I look at my own sort of career trajectory, there were a lot of moments that were serendipitous in terms of right place, right people, right time. But I still had to go the last mile of having the skills, the attitude, and the willingness to sort of like, carpe the shit out of the moment, whatever,
Yeah.
like, figuring out like how to make good on the opportunity that was in front of me. For example, years ago, I was kind of making a leap out of, I'd left kind of a toxic job situation. I was a single mom of an infant, basically. And my current role wasn't really supporting my single mom of a baby world. So I walked away from that job without much of a safety net. And it just so happened that social media was the catalyst for me meeting a man who was at the time the CMO of a startup that I ended up going to first do some freelance copywriting and content development work for, which developed into a full-time job, and then building a team and all kinds of stuff that kind of snowballed from there. But I think that part of what's been helpful, and the thing I talk to people a lot about, is being open to those serendipitous moments that don't necessarily sniff test the way that you would think your next career step might look like. So a lot of people get very hung up on the linear progression of like, I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then this is supposed to happen next. And I think a lot of times the reason I've managed to find my way through what I call a very messy and meandering career is that I've been open to the idea that the next thing doesn't maybe look like I think it should. I've switched careers from fundraising to sales leadership to marketing and back again. And I've worked in startups. I've worked in, like, currently in a very large organization. And every step in between has been a lot of me following my nose versus following a playbook.
Are you, but are you, I guess the question would be, how risk averse are you? Because while the job that you left with a young child was not conducive, it would have been hard for a lot of people, I think, to make that jump without a safety net. So like,
sure.
I don't know, like, are you a good poker player? Like, I don't, like, I don't know what the question is here, right? Because it's like, I'm not saying like, oh yeah, she just jumps out of planes for fun, she's a risk taker. No, but like, there is a certain sense of like, I don't know, like, you talk about serendipity, like, do you, are you cat-like? Like, are you just, do you have a confidence that you will land on your feet? Or like, you know what I mean? Like,
that's an interesting question. So I think risk aversion or risk tolerance has a lot to do with the season of life that you're in.
Okay.
So when I was young and had a daughter, I also, like, my parents were still alive. And even though I lived alone, and at the time had a pretty decent income, and I had like I won't say a ton, but I had a fair amount in savings that was like a little bit of a safety net for me financially. But I also knew that like neither one of my parents was going to let me live on the street. Okay. So I had the advantage of having that as a safety net at that time.
Yeah.
As my daughter has gotten older, my tolerance for risk has changed. I won't say that it's gone up or down, because I think, again, that is really dependent on my season in life. But like, when I took my job, I currently work for LinkedIn. And when I took my job at LinkedIn, almost 6 years ago now, I had come off a time in my life where I'd had a business that I owned for several years that failed spectacularly, ruined me financially, like utterly ruined me. And I needed to go back to the good old workforce to like rebuild and dig myself out of an immense amount of debt. And so I went back to work, got one job, lost that job 2.5 years later when they like turned over 3 CEOs in 3 years or something crazy like that. And then got a different job. And then a year and a half later, they sort of sunset my whole team and I was laid off a second time in 2 years. So when I came to LinkedIn, I was like kicked and down. And I took a step back out of leadership roles into an individual contributor role. I took a significant pay cut to do it. And because I needed the grounding function of stepping into a job I knew I could absolutely crush, that felt like it had, I mean, I don't think any job is a guarantee. There's no such thing as job stability, but I felt like I had a much better shot at a stable, larger organization of being able to get my feet back underneath me. And to some people, that's a calculated risk, taking a big pay cut, taking a title cut. And then again, 2 years ago, I moved from a long-time career in marketing and I moved over to the sales side where now part of my compensation is variable. So that's a different kind of risk.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm not risk averse or particularly like risk chasing.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on the moment I'm in. And I do a lot of soul searching around like, what are the pros of this situation? What are the cons? What are the risks? What are the potential upsides and benefits? And that's why I talk a lot about careers as an exercise in courage more than anything, because I think there are times you have to bet on yourself. You have to take risks or be willing to walk the road less traveled in order to find something that meets your both those professional ambitions that look nice on paper or on a resume, but also that fill your cup personally and that give you some inner peace. Like I lost both my parents this past year, and in the process of that kind of tragedy on top of tragedy, you start to realize that like neither one of my parents were lying on their deathbed wishing they'd worked more.
Yeah.
Or wishing that they'd gotten that promotion or lamenting that they didn't, take that job in Ohio or something. Like, it's like none of their reflections on their life as they were sick and dying had anything to do with their professional accomplishments. And I spent so much of the early part of my career inextricably tying my self-worth and my identity to my job and my career accomplishments and my professional resume. And my business failure was one sort of like earth-shattering moment that changed a lot of that for me. And the second has been just a reckoning of like so much loss in my life in the last couple of years, and realizing that I would like to retire someday and be financially secure and provide for my daughter and do those things. But I would also not like to work myself to death.
Yeah. So one of the, I guess, golden opportunities I have as a mainly free agent, while my savings dwindles as I try to make sure that my partner doesn't pay for all of the things, is that I spend a good portion of my week making sure that she doesn't work 70 hours and my best friends, two of whom are workaholics and overachievers, and that they don't I am now in a position where, because we are financially okay, mainly through savings and, just being economically responsible, I do worry, like, if I got a full-time job, who's there to keep the three people who are closest to me from working themselves to death? Because like, I'm the one who's like, all right, stop for lunch, or like, I'll go out and bring lunch to a friend of mine just to be like, okay, you You don't have to work through lunch. Like, I don't know where we went wrong that like, working through, like, I just, all I know is that in the early, before 2010, Mad Men was one of the number one shows on television, which glorified a certain era. But during that era, they took 90-minute lunches with booze, and that was acceptable. And here we are, less than 2 decades from that show being popular, and people are like, I can't take a lunch today. I have to work through it. And I'm like, that whatever that cultural zeitgeist is, I'm like, I'm the one now holding my friends back from like, okay, no, like they're not paying you for 120 hours this week.
Yeah. Well, the hard thing is like you can't save them from that. They've got to save themselves. So that's part of it. I think one of the hardest things about the journey that I've been on, I guess, is that people said that to me.
Okay.
In the height of my like workaholism and the intensity. I mean, so back in 2011, I published a book with a co-author, was really successful for its time, especially in the business book world. And we did this big, like 40 something city book tour. And I was on the road traveling almost nonstop for something like 6 months. And I look back at that, and whereas I'm thrilled with I love the accomplishment of having published the book, but I regret some of the time that I had like away from my daughter. And there were people who told me at the time, like, you're going to look back and you're going to miss, or you're going to wish you'd spent more time with your kid. You're going to be fried and burned out, and you're going to hit a wall. And at a certain point, this is going to come back to bite you. And they were right. But similar to like any, it's like, have you ever been in a relationship that wasn't good for you? And people are like, I don't know, man, that relationship's probably not so great.
And you look back and you go like, okay, you were right all along. I see it now from the outside.
Nobody could convince you of that in the moment.
That's true.
You had to live it yourself.
So so I'm your friend 20 years ago. What are you telling me? Like when I'm like, all right, maybe you should slow it down. Maybe just only go on the road for a few weeks and not like for 6, like, what are you telling me at the time? Or are you just blowing me off? I guess I'm
blowing you off.
Okay.
Like I blew a lot of people off, or I was like, I'm fine. I'm having a blast. I'm enjoying this. Cause at the time I had like the energy and the intensity and the drive to do all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't thinking about later. I was only thinking about then. And I was riding the high and the momentum of all of that. And I think deep down, I was also motivated by a certain degree of fear, maybe of like, I better capitalize on this now, because who knows what befalls me in the future. And what if I never get a shot like this again?
Okay.
So I would constantly feel like I had to chase every opportunity that was in front of me, because what if another one never came along? And so I blew people off all the time, being like, whatever you say, like, it'll be fine. And again, I was kind of afraid to not do it. And the changing perspective on that only came from life experience.
Okay.
And getting knocked in the dirt a few times enough to be like, it kind of comes back to something you said earlier about whether I'm like a risk chaser or whether I have 9 lives or something. It's like, no, I don't. But having a substantial amount of setback and failure in my career has definitely taught me that I'm resilient as hell.
Okay.
And that I have survived all of my worst days so far.
Yeah.
And that I've demonstrated to myself that I have the skills and the grit and the ability, and to some degree, like the network and the relationships, that if something befalls me, or if I miss a train that's coming my way, or some opportunity, another one will happen. I will find my way through. And that's given me a fair bit of inner peace, because I just have learned to trust the process. I know it sounds really cheesy, but it's like, I've learned to trust the process a little bit and believe that I'm pretty capable of getting through most things that are thrown at me, because I have a track record to prove it. And that in and of itself is helpful.
So this is a dangerous question,
Okay.
but I'm asking on behalf of friends of mine. I'm not asking on behalf of me, and we can get into why in a bit. But for now, do you think you needed to get knocked down in order for that to happen? Like
yes.
Okay, so it needed
totally.
to, you needed the befall in order to be able to, take the step back.
It's because those moments are where perspective comes from. You don't get perspective by like your current vantage point.
Okay.
It's almost impossible. So I absolutely, I'm not saying I welcomed it, and I'm not saying I would want to do it again, because like those were painful things that left scars. And in some ways were very traumatic, but I think that they were important reorienting functions for me that helped me really take stock, evaluate my priorities, figure out what mattered to me. And they were important character building moments because I had to figure it out.
Yep. And I think that's why I'm not in that boat, is because like I look back at my, sadly, you and I had a similar path, I guess, because like, so I spent 7 years in marketing for a destination marketing organization. And during those 7 years, nine, almost 10 years, I think, actually, I started the blog and I started podcasting, and I would leave work at 5 or 5:30, and I would come home and write, edit, or record for another 5 hours. Now, I was single for a good portion of that, but like, I look back at that and I go, okay, never again. Like, I'm not that was, well, I don't make money at any of this. This is all passion. I've seen a certain level of success, but worse than that, I've not stopped until I was let go, and I went, oh, like, okay, this is the, the first the depression kicks in, and then you settle down and you get back, and I'm like, well, I still have these passions. Let's do that. And I don't know, like, when I finally got myself back up, I was like, wait, I was doing this on top of 40 hours? Like, where was not look, it's not the same as like, where's the balance, but it was very much like, well, how do I still have friends? Like, clearly I wasn't seeing my family, like I wasn't, and so
yeah,
like,
I relate to that. And conversely, because I do have a more than 40-hour a week, like, daytime job now, personal passion projects have suffered as a result. So I've had a second book that I've been trying to write for probably 5 years. And it may take me several more before I actually can crank it out and get it published. Because I just can't do it all. And I have zero interest in draining myself to the dregs in the pursuit of all of that combined.
yeah,
I still want to spend time with my kid. I want to ride my horse. I want to hang out with my best friend and her kids. I want to, I want to do those things. I want to travel. I want to live some life outside of that. And just like constantly the pursuit of producing output is going to hinder that. So it's like, I got to make choices about where I spend my time. And that means sometimes projects get put on the back burner because they don't fit my season of life right now.
yeah. I've already considered, like, this is the preparation thing for me. I'm like, all right, well, if I do get a job, like, I guess I can cut all my content in half. And it's like, it's that, like, what's acceptable for me? Cause again, there is a part of it where it's like, well, what fills my cup? And this does it. It's weird for people, cause they're like, yeah, but you like talk to people and that's all. I'm like, well, no, it's just like, well, you're a blogger. All you do is write. Well, no, I do some research. I do some editing on but like, it's not just the fun stuff. But I think that's what makes it enjoyable. Like, it is still a bit, like, I don't want to say taxing, but like there are parts of this as a passion where it's like, time to edit. Like,
it's demanding, and it's demanding, and it's sometimes it's sort of like, for me, sitting down to write, like there are parts of it that are chore like, because you're like, okay, if I want this outcome, I have to sit down and do the work. And that means fingers on keyboards, even when I'm not feeling the muse.
Yep.
You know, and I have the luxury of making that choice. But if that were my job, there was a time before I came to LinkedIn when after I'd gotten laid off, before I got this job, there was a period of about, I don't know, 6-8 months or whatever, where I was unemployed, and I was doing a fair amount of freelancing in the meantime. And there were times where like I had deadlines and I had clients, and I had like, the love of writing wasn't part of that process. That was a job at that time. And so I had to sit down and write stuff, and I had to sit down and do the work, even when I wasn't feeling particularly motivated to do it. And I'm looking forward to a day when I can get back to writing for my love of writing, and not because it's a thing that I have to do.
So I have to say that my experience with my blog has been, like, I've talked to a lot of authors, and a lot of them talk about their passion for writing or their addiction to writing. I feel like I'm in a bad relationship with writing. Like, that's the best, because like there are moments when I'm like, this is amazing, look what I wrote, and there are other times when I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why? Like, and
That just means you're a real writer.
I don't know. Is that what that means? Like, because I just
totally.
I like, there are posts that just drive me nuts, and I like, granted, it's a passion project, but I've also sadly, when you talk about like professional development, I can sit across from you, the recruiter or interviewer, and be like, hey, yeah, so I know I've been out of work for a while, but like I do put out for like one blog post a week and 2 podcasts every month, and so, you know, every year that's at least 78 pieces of content that I am creating au naturel by myself from my own whatever. And I have come to learn that a lot of places don't consider it legitimate if you're doing it for yourself. So I've started to take on like volunteer writing roles so I can pad my portfolio in addition, because they're like, but that's your blog. I'm like, well, yeah, and if you'd write it, you know I take it seriously, and it's not just like 6 status updates stuffed together on a blog post. But I have gotten back to writing things I'm not passionate about, or that I have no interest in. It's like, well, I'm writing for you, so what would you like me to write? And it's kind of a bit of like, it's probably the one thing that's injected the most life into my actual blogging, because it's like, oh, now I get to choose. It's like this thing I'm volunteering for, and I have to write this.
Yeah, I get that. I think that any writer worth their salt who tells you they love it all the time is lying.
Yeah.
Lying. Like, I have a couple of friends who are very successful novelists and fiction writers. And we talk a lot about the fact that writing is as much discipline as it is pursuit of creativity. Like, there's romanticizing the idea that every time you sit down at the keyboard, you're feeling super inspired and in love with your craft. Like, there's days when I curse my keyboard or sit at a blank page, and the string of epithets that falls out of my mouth is like, I write nonsense because that's all that's in my head that day. There's no writer who has had any modicum of success with writing that has not had a million of those days. It's like, it's just not love and infatuation every single day.
I had a friend of mine who's like, you should journal. And I was like, all right, I'll try anything. And so I did. And then I stopped. I journaled for a full week. I'd get up. I basically just adjusted my morning routine. I said, I got up, I got my coffee, and then I went down into my basement, where I had set up a little, like, here's the pad and pen. We're not going to do it on a computer because I'll get distracted. I'm just going to journal. And after a week, I had written the most negative stuff you have ever seen. Like, I'm never going to get hired again. I can't believe I have to edit this thing. Like, just not like, and I know there are people out there listening to this. They're like, oh, well, you got the bad thoughts out. No. When I write the thing down, it doesn't leave my body. So, like, all I was doing was manifesting more negative stuff in the morning.
Well, it's interesting that you've had that experience, because my experience is very different. That journaling for me is very much a dump the.
Okay, you can get it out.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of a practice that comes from the book The Artist's Way, called Morning Pages. And the key to it is that it's very stream of consciousness. So I don't try to write fancy. I just write vomitous stream of consciousness, whatever happens to be in my head. And for me, maybe this is partly my neurospiciness, but it's also like I find that as clutter cleaning for my brain.
Okay.
So a lot of the invasive or intrusive thoughts, or the hamster wheel, as I jokingly call it, of my head, where there's just this constant spinning, journaling helps me get some of that out. But like, everybody's experience is different. So if journaling isn't a thing that works for you, the other thing I'm always talking to people about is, like, you've got to pick the things that work and chuck the ones that don't. So if journaling works for me and not for you, don't journal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you can't. I have long since realized that reading all of people's, like, tips and tricks and hacks and whatever other things, rarely do other people's modes and methods work for me. So I'm sort of like this kit bashed mess of duct tape and baling wire. But I've figured out systems that work for me, and I just sort of ignore what everybody else is doing, because I know I'm old enough now that I know that, like, you know, some ingenue popping onto social media with her very first corporate job telling me how to be productive is probably not going to work for me.
I've refrained from, like, really taking them to task, because, like, there's a part of me, and I've drafted them, and look, I consider myself a bigger person because I've drafted these and not hit publish. But, like, there are times when I'm reading some of these hacks and tricks and tips that you're talking about, and I'm like, you've never worked a day in your life, or, like, you don't know what, like, it's because, like, you can. Most of these you can pick apart. I do get a little bit of a chuckle, like, and it really is truly a benevolent chuckle. Like, I'm not being denigrating, but it's like, I do get a little bit of a chuckle at, like, the 25-year-old life coaches, you know, or whatever. I'm like, I think back to my 25-year-old self and what business I may or may not have had telling anybody what to do with their lives or careers. And I still don't think I have that right, but at least I have a lot more miles on me now, where I feel like I at least have the gift of perspective and experience to share. But I get reached out to a lot to young women, especially, who are wanting to be like, I just had a message on my LinkedIn today, like, don't you want to be, I want to help you build your coaching business. And, like, the irony of a young coach reaching out to me to coach me on building a coaching business. There's something very meta about this, but see, that's the word. I know, like, I know that's the word a lot of people have used, but for me, I just see the word pyramid everywhere I go. Like, and look, I made a mistake, and I'll be the first to admit this. I put podcaster in my LinkedIn bio, and anyone out there, if there's a phrase you can come up with that's not podcast, I get more, hey, I can help you promote your podcast. Like, and look, I also want to be open, so I'm not going to close all my messaging. I'm just not that person. Right. But it also leaves me open to, like, all these people trying to help me. And I just think, like, if all of them would just listen to one episode, I would be doing much better. Like, I don't need your promotion. Just take the time, listen to one episode, any one episode. That's fine. That's all I need. That's
Well,
great.
most of that kind of stuff isn't very well thought out outreach anyway. I get, you actually would laugh at how many messages on LinkedIn I get with people trying to sell me like their LinkedIn course or their
Okay.
LinkedIn consulting or their LinkedIn, like, I can make you a thought leader on LinkedIn. I'm like, yo, I work for LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Like, did you take 10 seconds to even look at my bio? Because it's like, it's right there. Like, it's right there.
Okay, but here's the real question. Do you want to be a thought leader?
Oh boy. There's a can of worms. So, thought leader. Um, I a lot of people have an allergy to that term, especially in marketing. I get it. It's a little inside baseball for us. Like, we're very close to the problem because we spend a lot of time thinking about that stuff, and so we have like a natural aversion to it. But it has a lot of legitimacy in the broader business world. So I value it, and a lot of the stuff around thought leadership as a concept. I think thought leader is one of those titles that you don't self-designate.
Yeah.
It's like calling yourself a,
Well, it's the
I don't know.
guru, it's the Jedi. We went through this like probably about a decade ago, where like
Yeah.
cool titles were in. I'm not an
And
IT manager.
I
I'm an
feel like
IT whatever.
I just feel like that you can't self-bestow a title that really is about other people's evaluation of the quality and caliber of your work.
Yeah.
So, like, if other people want to think of me as a thought leader or someone who leads in thought in my particular discipline, great. I love that they think that highly of my work. But it is certainly, I will never be that person who puts it in my bio.
Yeah.
Because it feels weird to me. It just is one of those things that I just don't think I can self-designate that. And it is so subjective. So a thought leader to one person is an absolute shill to somebody else. And I know people who are very well respected in the business world whose advice I would never follow if I was, like, if it was the last thing on earth. And they may very well be a respected thought leader, but their values don't align to mine. So it's just not a thing. Anyway, so point being, do I want to be a thought leader? It's not something I'm aiming for, but people call me one all the time. So
Wait.
deal with that what you will.
Okay. I just cause like I think about the self designations too, and I'm probably like I'm the realist and the like you. My real specialty has been like long term thinking, to the point, maybe probably to my own like detriment, because like people will be like, we're thinking about starting a podcast, and we're going to pay you to edit it. I'm like, great. What's episode 10? And they're like, we only have a 1. And I'm like, well, there's probably a mini series and not a podcast. I'm just, out here being like the guy who's like, well, I'm over 100 episodes of my own show, and I've talked to too many people that stopped at 12. Like, and I refuse to take your money for one episode. And it's like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if that makes me a realist, a pragmatist, or just an idiot for not taking the money. I don't know.
I don't know that it's, well, I certainly wouldn't characterize it as idiocy. It sounds to me like what you have is a standard that you prefer, which is working with people who are trying to play a long game versus someone who's trying to capitalize on a short term, what they perceive to be a trend. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people who started podcasts because they're like, everybody else has a podcast, so I guess I should have a podcast. Sort of like back in the day when everybody started a blog, and those of us who were actual prolific bloggers who were like, yeah, cool. Like, come talk to me in a year and see if you're still blogging. And lots of people fall off on that kind of stuff. But then again, like, I would like to consider myself a weightlifter, but like, I don't go to the gym with any regularity either. So I think everybody has to decide what they're willing to invest time in. And eventually, if you're not in it for the long haul, maybe it's just that your your particular flavor of wanting to work with people is people who are a little more seasoned and dedicated to the craft. And I think that's okay. Like, you have to pick, especially if those are the kind of clients or partners that fuel you or that inspire you to want to work with them. I think that's meaningful. And I think you're allowed to have those standards. Similarly to like when I think some of that you have a luxury at a certain point to make those choices. But when I was freelancing, I was picky about my clients too, because I didn't want to, I didn't want to write about irritable bowel syndrome.
There's also a part of me, like, I guess not only I guess it's like a bit of self-preservation where it's like, well, what have you done?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've done 17 pilots for 17 different shows and they've all died. Like that, I wouldn't tell anybody that anyway. Like, but
right.
But none of that work gets shared. like, cause you're like, oh, here's this thing I did. Is there more? No. It's just a one-off. Like, no.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's something still to be said for trying a lot of things, even if they don't necessarily go anywhere. But like I said, I think you're also entitled to pick your niche. And maybe that's like working with people who have some longevity to their work. And there's probably something to be said for that, because those are the people who maybe will stick around.
So
ostensibly,
I have to ask this question. You have gone through a lot and you have kind of gotten off the treadmill, as it were. What's like one thing that like maybe you did when you were a kid, like that you've rediscovered as like a fun thing in the last little bit, now that you're taking some time for you?
For me, it's horses.
Okay.
I rode as a kid, and I guess it's kind of cheating because I've been back involved with horses because for a while, since my daughter, when she was about 7, decided she wanted to ride, and she has now far eclipsed my riding talent by several orders of magnitude and rides competitively and will probably, hopefully she has aspirations to ride at the collegiate level. But the barn is my sanctuary. Okay. It's like the one very analog place in my life where I can put my phone in my tack trunk and just be with my animals. My best friend and I co-own a baby, very young, like ex-race horse. And my daughter has a very nice horse that she rides and competes with. And that's my happy place. So when I'm fried to a crisp, the barn is the place that I go. And I started doing more of it when my daughter was younger as more of like barn mom, but I sort of, even at the time, didn't do it as much for myself. I was like, well, this is a her thing now, and I don't need to ride anymore. But as it turned out, I missed it terribly too. So when I finally let myself go back and like take lessons, which is humbling, because after you ride as a kid and then you go back and ride as like a middle-ager, you're like, wow, this is harder than I remember. And like my body is sort of angry at me for doing these things. Because contrary to popular belief, like equestrian sports are very like physically demanding. So
yeah, but anyway, I think that everyone who thinks that riding sports or racing sports are easy should have to do it. Like, cause they're like, oh, well, I go 95 on the highway. Of course I could be a race car. It's like, no, when you're pulling 5Gs in any turn, or like you're going at speed on a horse, like none of that stuff is, first of all, none of that stuff is normal for anyone. No. And it's just not easy, but it's
punishing on your body. Like, and I'm a race fan too. Like we go to Indy every year, and I really enjoy watching F1 racing. And it's like, those are athletes.
Oh yeah.
The people who race are athletes, because the demands it puts on your body are astronomical.
I did want to ask though, if the barn was not so analog, do you think it would be as relaxing for you? Because
absolutely not.
Okay, because I only ask because like I think that there was a time when I first bought my house where I was like, I hate mowing the lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent more and more time at work in front of a computer. And it was like, oh my God, I got to do something with my hand. Look what look what I did. That's real. And that analogness is so, it's more than,
it's so restorative.
It's more than just disconnecting. It's like, I did a thing. I accomplished a real thing with my hands.
Well, and there's something to be said for, being outside, being in nature, being like, I enjoy gardening. I'm pretty bad at it, but I really enjoy it. I think if I had more time and space, like I have kind of a tiny little yard, but if I had a big yard, I probably would be one of those like gardening crazies who just has like plants everywhere. Because I love like the feeling of dirt and being in the dirt and planting flowers and tending pulling. I actually enjoy pulling weeds. Like it's, but no, I don't. If the barn wasn't as analog as it is, I would probably, it would be something else like gardening or hiking or creative pursuits. I was a music major in college, so music plays a really important role in my life, and I still haul out my flute and play or sit down at the piano and play. So I need escapism in the form of either getting outside or entertaining the right side of my brain, because my left side gets so much work at work.
I spend a lot of time in this space, and this time after conversations encouraging you to just create something. But there is something to be said for demanding passion projects like this podcast. It's not just sitting down to record, though it always looks like that from the outside. There's reaching out to guests, being professional in communication so people don't think you're just some random amateur, scheduling, time zone juggling, because time zone juggling and scheduling are not necessarily as simple as, how about this? Recording and all the technical know-how that comes along with it, and then editing and writing this actual thing I'm speaking right now. And then there's actually a few more things, but you get the picture. Demanding passion projects often appear to be less than the sum of their parts, but they endure because they are challenging, and they are perhaps more fulfilling than the less demanding ones. But that's only something I wanted to touch on. The thing I wanted to reiterate the most was just how different Amber and I are, and yet we both unwind in an analog way. For me, it's most often reading, but also involves cooking, baking, and yard work. And for her, it's the sanctity and analog nature of the barn. Perhaps it's time you truly unplug for more than just an afternoon. Maybe make it a daily thing. You won't be sad you did. Also, I know you can't save people from themselves, but let me be honest for a moment. It probably won't stop me from trying. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 121. And now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can find all related ways to contact Amber and myself in the show notes. There you will find links to Amber's relevant social channels, and I encourage you to follow her on your platform of choice. The music for this episode was provided by Henno Heitur. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, Amber, do you have one final question for me?
I think the one that pops to mind first, that is a little bit inspired by our conversation, is all things being equal, if you could hit the reset button today, and money wasn't the issue, like where would you spend your time and your energy and investment of your heart and mind?
I mean, it probably is. I'd have to be able to take this knowledge back is the problem, because I started the blog as a writing exercise because I needed to write for my professional gig, and I hadn't written since college. I had been in retail. I hadn't done any writing, and I found that I really liked writing even for myself. So like once I got that going, I was like, well, why wasn't I doing this all along? Because I started blogging in 2010 or 11. I started blogging well after it was a thing. So I would have started that much sooner. And I think the podcast would probably be the same thing. Like, I enjoy having just open conversations about anything with anyone. And you can compare that to whomever you prefer. But like, I think I would have started it. People would like accuse me of like being a proxy caster, which I loved, because it was like, oh, he doesn't need his own show, he's got yours. Because I would just guest on everybody's shows, and everybody.
I was gonna say, I don't think I've heard that term before.
Yeah,
so
it's basically
okay.
it's just because like I was, and I still have it on my site as like a little fun Easter egg. It's like, here are I think I'm close to approaching this show being more prolific than that. But I guessed it on like 100 plus episodes of other people's shows. Some of them were occasional recurring bits. Some of them weren't. But it was very much like, all right, well, last, 10 years ago or 5 years ago or whenever it was, it would be like, oh, well, I guessed it on 7 shows this month. Or like, I guessed it on 3. And all I have to do is show up and talk. Why would I start my own? I don't have to, I can help promote it, but I don't have to edit it. They're scheduling it. Like, what? Perfect, right? And I still think I enjoy that. But it's the two things that are the most creative for me, the blog and the podcast. I would have just started so much earlier. Like, yeah,
is that what it is for you? Is it the creativity of it? Is it the, like, what part?
Oh no, it's everything. Oh no, it's everything.
Okay.
I don't mind. And perhaps this is the moderation of it. I don't mind the editing. I don't mind the promotion. And really, I don't mind like the behind the scenes, like, hey, let's do some time zone math. Let's figure out when we can record, like all of that. And perhaps it is in moderation. I put out 2 shows a month, or maybe 3, depending on how the weeks go, but it's every other week. And I put out 1 blog a week. So I have the ability to not only work ahead, but then I get to weather the storm on like, I have a list on my desk somewhere. We're recording this in March. It'll probably go out in April or May is my guess, if my math is right. And you could be listening to this well into the future. But as it stands right now, I have a list of 5 blog posts that if I draft before the end of March, will finish my July, right? Like I'm that far ahead, which means if I get depressed, if I find if something happens, God forbid, if I just end up like with writer's block, I have some time to work through it. And the same is true for the podcast. Like, we're recording ahead. So that way, if I can't get a guest, because this show, by the way, in case you haven't wondered, this show doesn't work without a you. Like, it's just, I don't.
I mean, you could talk to yourself, but it would probably be a little bit less.
Yes, it's not nearly as exciting. No.
Yeah.
But like, so I think it's all of the things. I get to be a little bit, I've got spreadsheets to keep myself organized.
It's just so interesting because like I had a blog for eons and I loved it until I didn't. But there's never been a part of me that has desired to be a YouTuber or to start a podcast. Like, I'm perfectly happy to do this and like be guests on podcasts, but there's nothing that interests me about the production side of a podcast. I've thought about it simply because, like you, I enjoy conversating with interesting people. But I think that I would end up fatigued by the operational side of things such that it took away from the joy part of it for me.
That's where the bad thought leadership for podcasting comes into play, because
Mm.
they will all tell you, all of them, that my show doesn't work. It's every other week. You're going to lose people in the off week. I don't
It's
just
too
talk
long,
to authors.
Right? Did I tell you how it's too long?
No, that comes and goes. That comes and goes. I have the benefit of people forgetting conveniently about like a Mark Maron and a Joe Rogan, which average closer to 75 to 3 hours, and they forget about them, and then they go like, oh, you need 25 minutes, and then they remember that those are two of the bigger shows, and they go, oh yeah, an hour's fine. And so like that comes and goes. But like personally, I would tell you, absolutely start a show, but like do it in 10 episode micro seasons where you can stop. Like, that's my big problem as far as the podcast is concerned, is I work ahead so I can take time off, because I didn't think like, oh, maybe I should do a season. And I'm at like 100 plus in like, at this point, like you just don't do a season. It's fine. But like, I think if you want to do it for the reasons you stated, if you choose not to do 52 in a year, if you choose to do 26 or 13 or 12, you would absolutely not get bogged down in all that other stuff. But that's,
well, and I would for sure have to like pay other people to do the like post-production and editing and publishing and stuff, because I lack the knowledge and skills, and B, I lack the will and fortitude to learn those things.
See,
so it's like,
I don't think that's true, because I look at everything where you are right now, and everything we talked about in the main episode, like what the skills I have that you don't would take you a week to get. Like
but like, I don't know if I want them.
Well, that's fair. That's entirely true. Look, that's fair. And look, I would say, if you're comfortable guesting on shows, there is nothing better in the world than showing up to talk and leaving.
Right.
That's the best feeling in the world.
Well, and I like I said, I think that it's also just it's a medium bias. So like, I'm a writer. I gravitate toward writing, and I on my better days, I love writing. And I love the feeling that comes with writing. And maybe I don't know. I don't know if podcasting is something I would fall in love with, and maybe I should try it and see. But
I mean, I'll say this. Before the podcast, even with all the proxy casting stuff, I did what I called interrogations, because I still lean pretty heavily on the spy brand stuff for Agent Palmer, but like, they were long form, maybe 4 back and forth email conversations. And I will tell you that editing this show is much easier than going back and forth with you over email for
I believe
faux
that
conversation. Too. And I like talking to people. So it kind of works both ways. But like, I'm also of the mind, and this makes me an outcast in some of my own circles, where like, everybody's like, well, you're a blogger. Why don't you just read your blog and put out an episode for, it's like, I want each media. I'm still now talking about going into video. The problem with it is not that I don't have any ideas. It's that all the ideas I have are bad, because I want the medium to be unique. You go to my blog for my written word on that stuff. You come here for conversation. You're not going to go to my YouTube channel for more of the same. That I can just do that here or whatever on the blog. So like, I'm trying to be different instead of just well,
that's interesting, because I think that part of my mental roadblock around people have asked me to start podcasts, or said like, oh, this would make a great podcast, like this concept or topic or whatever. And I resist it, because I'm like, yeah, but like, do I want to do yet another like interview podcast of like, that's the same old format, which the same old, like, that just seems so very not interesting. And so I've often thought about whether I could or wanted to create something that was a little bit more like just differently structured somehow. And that was included some stuff that was more monologue-y or other stuff that was like without me entirely, that was hand the mic entirely over to somebody. I don't know, but I just cannot get myself excited about doing yet another back and forth interview podcast, because I feel like so many people are doing that so well that I'm not going to add anything to that that's useful.
That was how I arrived at this concept. I was like, and look, I don't mean, because I've taken some chances on some guests because I have nothing to lose. So I've had people that have never done a podcast ever, and I'm their only one. But the episodes of mine that turn into interviews are ones where I fail as host. So it's like, that's my concept. Like, if I have to, it's fine asking you a question every once in a while. That's going to happen when we're having a cup of coffee in a cafe.
Sure.
But if you're like just giving me a sentence or two and not throwing the ball back in this conversation, I failed here. But like, I in theory, everyone has the ability to do whatever they want on the audio format. I think people get really lost because people are like, well, I also have to do a video. It's like, no, you don't. And people get a bit lost in like the weeds on the mediums, plural, than just, all right, I have a blog. I write about cool things I've seen or read or what's on my mind. I have a podcast and I talk to cool people. It's not, none of this is rocket surgery.
Yeah, no. And I mean, like I'm a chronic overthinker. So that could play.
You and I are,
plus,
so am I though. It really does. I mean, I needed a good idea to start this show, but I can show you the tonnage of notes that I wrote down of like potential ideas for what this could have been.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too, is I admittedly, one of my Achilles heels, well, I don't know, I guess it could be a strength or a weakness depending on how you frame it, but I'm really good at starting things. I'm not always great at finishing them or following through on them. So I've had I have a bazillion ideas bombing around my head at all given times. But my follow through sometimes lacks, and I will lose stamina on things because.
But how? What's but how intensive are these? Right? Like I have started more blog posts than I've published. Right? I can tell you that right now. So like, I
mean, my notes app in my phone is basically my graveyard.
Yeah. So is mine. That's where great ideas go, and they either get resurrected or they die.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of writing graveyards. I have a lot of project graveyards. I have a lot of burgeoning business idea graveyards. And
by the time you get back to it, it's not a burgeoning business anymore.
Or it's just like I've lost all interest in it. I go back to like, I think there's part of this that's like my neurodiversity, ADHD-ishness, that I will, even with my hobbies, like creative hobbies, I will pick up something artistic and fixate on it for a while and then abruptly be so over it that I don't want to see it ever again. I went through a phase, for example, of doing paper quilling, which I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but it's like long strips of paper that you curl up into tiny little spirals and you make little shapes with them. And then you make the little shapes into bigger shapes. And it's really cool. And it's very beautiful. And I was like, I want to teach myself how to do that. And so I did. And so for weeks on end, every time my daughter would come out of her room, their mom was like hovered over the paper quilling, like making a mess. And then one day I was just like sick of it. And I packed it all up and I put it away and I haven't touched it since.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a few things that have like music has been a like music writing, needlework. Some of those things have been like consistent through lines for me, but I'm very much a shiny object chaser sometimes. And that can be to my benefit when I'm just ping ponging a lot of ideas, but it can also be my downfall because I'm like, yeah, so that was a great idea for 10 minutes.
Yeah. I feel that. And like musically, I have that where it's like I have a few instruments in the house. Now, look, the tenor saxophone's probably never getting picked up ever again. I know there's not a good reed in this house, but like I have bass is one of my loves. I can play guitar, and I got a drum kit. And like there are times when it's like Like I always dream of being a well-balanced, like, like in any given 7-day period, I have picked up the bass, a guitar, and the drums. But that's never, like, I will play the bass for months. And then I'll be like, I haven't touched the guitar in a while. And then I'll just play the guitar for months. And it'd be like, I haven't touched any, like, so I don't know if it's you get in a groove or like it is that like shiny thing where it's like, it's not even new. Like it's old, but I'm going back to it. Yeah.
I do that all the time. I resurrect things too. And maybe I'll come back to the paper quilling someday. It's like still here on a shelf somewhere. But I think the positive side of that is that I like having fresh stimuli around me or fresh things that I can be like, oh, that's new. I had forgotten I did that once. Like, I'll do that again. For example, when I was in college, I paid a lot of my bills by doing calligraphy. I taught myself how to do calligraphy, and I made a fair bit of like side hustle money doing wedding invitations and all that kind of stuff. But then it very quickly became a job, and then I didn't love it as much anymore. And then I kind of set it aside. But then, a couple of years ago, I picked it back up again. I'm like, oh, I forgot that I really loved this. So I kind of like having an arsenal of rotating shiny objects that I can repurpose and be like, oh, right, dust that off. Remember that. So like I said, I've had a few that are like my stalwarts, but I worry sometimes about taking on something like a podcast and being like, is that my next shiny object? Am I going to do like 6 of them and be like, wow, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. And maybe who cares? Maybe there's no consequence to doing that, but I don't know, maybe someday.
Yeah, we'll talk off mic.
Okay. Fair enough.